this moves us on to the fourth question about how do we get staff to be more compassionate and understanding in the way they treat patients and carers. This has to be something that's within an organisation, can't be done too. So what did you come up with?
What we started off was saying that we should devise the values within the organisation. That the values should be driven by staff, by patients as to what the organisational values are. And then they should be reinforced by regular meetings with staff, through appraisal, through induction, ideally led by the chief executive to say these are the values within the organisation. Now, the values should then be sort of, the conversation of the second part is to have a conversation with the staff to make sure that we provide them with the right training, the right skills to deliver what we want them to deliver. So value staff as well as them valuing our sort of patients. Ideally, you want to employ them on what the organisational values are. You know, employ staff.
Select them on the basis.
Yeah,
of the
select them on the basis of the values. So therefore, these are the values of the organisation. And then, having done that, you know, if they fail to comply with those values, hold them to account. You know, we keep on saying hold them to account. Make it clear what is expected of them, and failure to comply will lead to sanctions, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
what about compassion, though? I mean, is that?
Well, I think
in the demonstrating the interactions with the patient.
The compassion is to say, well, how do you demonstrate compassion? We also acknowledge that as we have an aging population, do we have the right skill sets to actually look after the aging population with increasing percentage of patients with dementia? Do we have the infrastructure? Therefore, the compassion is to say, how do we train people into compassion? You know, do as you want done to yourself, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's raising the issue. It's not just sort of cuddly compassion with the patients that can talk to you. It's compassion for those quite challenging patients and how you support staff in those situations.
First, recognising what the staff's needs are. Secondly, giving them the sort of pressure releasing valves, because they are going to be occasionally stressed. One of the earlier presentations was how do staff actually talk about the areas that they cause them concern? How do they acknowledge that they got it wrong occasionally? How do they whistleblow, for example? How do they find out?
We heard from Jocelyn earlier on that one way of giving staff the opportunity to talk about how they feel about the care that they're giving to their patients. Are there other things that could help support staff?
We're also sort of looking at complaints as a learning tool rather than as a sort of punitive tool. So what are the sort of complaints saying? For example, in our organisation, the first 3 months, you know, first 3 quarters, the main complaints related to staff attitude.
Yeah.
So we've got to start saying, where are the areas of staff attitude? Are they in areas of stress, like an A&E department, like an AMU department? Are they in other areas which are sort of, why are some areas in the trust always compassionate? You know, look at the cancer department it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yet under stress, they do a very good job. So essentially, you know, how do we say, ideally, you know, one of the final message was, spend a week in a bed yourself before you start caring for somebody else.
Yes. There won't be many people queuing up for that. That'll do. Want to go in.
Just one thing, and I'm not sure we did touch on this now, but I was just remembering back to the chap from the nuclear industry who put down a list of things which I then actually mapped back onto what Liam Donaldson had originally said, and of course they marry pretty well. But one of the things he did point out, which isn't in some of the earlier DH documents, about the success of an organisation as a whole, was about celebrating success. And I think there is something here about celebrating compassion, celebrating what the organisation does. Of course, if you're in a mid-staff situation, you shouldn't be celebrating when terrible things are going on. Well, indeed, and of course there is a danger within an organisation where one thing's going wrong, then the rest of it all gets infected. But there is something about the extent to which the NHS values its staff and how much it values its staff. And I suspect that successful organisations are also good at celebrating success among their staff and at motivating them in that way. So it's not just using the stick, but you also have to use the carrot in order to try and drive these values forward.
Indeed. Jocelyn, then we'll move on to the last bit.
There are some very good practical ways of helping staff to understand the impact of their behaviour and words on patients, which are anything from quite simple things like shadowing a patient for half a day or a day, through to the more elaborate methods like experience-based co-design, which we work with. And and I think the best places that I've seen in the States do this often. So they take staff, spend a day, they spend half a day out of their own area just looking at what's going on, and that somehow seems to reconnect them in a very quick way with what's it like looking at this with a new pair of eyes.
Yeah, so they can see it in somewhere else and see what's good or bad, but not necessarily in their own.
Just building on those two with the mandate, I just thought today what I've taken from this is that it's sort of implicit that we all assume that everyone comes to work to care for patients, and certainly that is the intention, but the day job sometimes makes that very hard to, when the extraordinary becomes ordinary, that's really hard. And whether we have to now, rather than rely on goodwill and heroic individuals and great people like Cyril Chandler, to proactively do things that help gravitate people back to what they want to do. So as part of people's objective, everyone gets an objective set every year. So if you say to people, your core job is to provide patient-focused care, that's agreed to be part of everyone's contract, everyone's JD. What do you need in order to help you keep focused on that? What will blow you off course? If it's a nurse, it's a 12-hour shift. If you're a manager, it may be board papers. Let's have an explicit conversation about what blows you off course. What can you do to keep yourself focused? What can we do to support you in that? And to really make that an explicit part of the conversation rather than kind of assuming that everyone's going to do the right thing.
There's a psychological contract that's explicit.